Start with the most important thing. It doesn't matter what you work with. A good feedback culture is essential. Whether you're in the welding business or you're in marketing or you run a circus, good feedback is vital. Now, how do you ask for feedback and how do you receive it? I'm going to share with you 10 tips from my life. You may use them, you may ignore them. That's the nice thing about advice and feedback. So the first thing is we're going to talk about how to ask for feedback because that's a skill in itself. Tip number one is, well, explain why you're asking. Are you looking to make your writing 20% shorter? Do you want them to look for holes in the plot? What are you going to use this for? Is this just so you can say you ran it past some reviewers, or is this because you're looking to fix a certain something? Tell people, why are you asking? That's not a given. Second tip is, when you're asking, be as specific as you can be. Do you want somebody? Again, if you're trying to shave off 20% of a text, then you might want them to look for that. Instead of just saying, do you like it? Is it good? What does it make you feel? Then instead say, hey, I'd like you to give me some feedback on this text. In particular, I'd like you to see, where can I make it shorter? Where can I make the language tighter? Is there something I can even cut? Be as specific as you can be. And don't just ask, do you like it? Because that's fine, but it doesn't really help on a feedback level. Now, it's also important to say to people, make it easy for them to say no. Asking somebody for feedback is a little bit tricky because there's this weird sense of who owes who a favor, and should they say no, and is it impolite to say no? Make it easy. Say, if you're too busy, if you're not into it, say no. It's okay. But it's easier if you say it to them when you're asking. Tip number 4 is open calls work pretty well. And the reason I say open calls work too is because asking somebody specifically for specific feedback, especially if it's an expert in the field, well, that works best. Let's be fair. But an open call can give you some interesting tidbits from people you'd never have considered, especially because we don't know all the people we know. We don't know their backgrounds. We don't know their passions. Maybe that guy that you met once 5 years ago, but is following you on Facebook, and you're following him, not a stalker thing. Maybe he actually reads those French romance novels that you're now getting yourself into, and he can provide expert feedback, and you just never knew. So open calls have a certain something to them. I'd advise on trying that. But with that said, targeted feedback works best. Targeted feedback from a targeted person, specific audiences, reaching out to people saying, hi, I'd like your help. And one of the reasons is that then it doesn't just become a small thing. They write a few words or kind of they dig into the topsoil. If you talk with somebody, if you have a conversation, it can lead to some pretty interesting places once you start scratching at the surface and getting to kind of the juicy stuff below. That was 5 tips on how to ask for feedback. Now here are 5 tips on how to receive that feedback, which is also not that easy. Tip number 6, well, you can ignore it. This is something that I always tell people when I'm giving them feedback. I said, you can ignore it. You don't have to justify yourself. You can just say, nice, Klaus, thank you, and then move on. You don't even have to say the part. I'll be fine if you do. It's okay. You can ignore feedback. And this is something that is tough for people to learn. And the reason for it is because there are people who are bad at giving feedback. Not so much that the feedback is bad quality. No. When I talk about the bad ones, I'm not talking about bad people or even bad quality feedback. I'm talking about people who give feedback or give advice and they expect it to be followed. Now, this is tricky because sometimes you'll sit there and you've given your expert level advice and you're thinking, why aren't they doing what I told them? But there may be reasons. Maybe the Chinese partners don't like it. Did you not know there were Chinese partners? Well, guess what? Sometimes there are. Sometimes it's other things. Sometimes somebody doesn't want to disappoint their mother. So an otherwise good tip is not going to be useful. Sometimes there are issues or problems or opportunities that you simply don't see as the person giving the feedback. So when people give you feedback or advice and they kind of nag you because you didn't take it, stop asking those people for advice because it gets to be toxic in the long run. Now, no matter what people say to you, whether it's a small thing, whether they say, I liked it, period, or they come with a great analysis with a lot of tips on how to make it better, thank them. It's a simple thing. Say, thank you. Thank you for spending your time. Thank you for spending your energy. Thank you for sharing your insights with me. Thank people. It's pretty easy. This one's more tricky. Try, and try again. And what I mean by that is that it's pretty tempting once you've asked somebody for their opinion on something, whether it's your new painting or an upcoming book or a website or a TV show, whatever it is, it's pretty tempting to think, okay, I've asked her once, I'm not going to ask her again. But the reality is that you can ask the same person again, especially if you make it easy for them to say no, because they might say something different the second time. They might say, oh, I like what you did there. I like the changes you've made, but now this is suddenly an issue, or now here's an opportunity. So try, and try again. Don't think that just because you asked one person to take a look at the first chapter of your book, and now it's 2 years later, they're off the list. You can't ask them anymore. Ask people again, especially if you make it easy to say no. And last, and this one is perhaps the most tricky of all, don't be afraid to listen. There's a thing, and especially with people who are not yet that experienced in their field, that they're afraid to listen. They want feedback, they want advice, but they also want whatever comes out to be their own. They want to be able to say, that was my idea, that was my thinking, that was my words, that was my plan. And if they listen to too much feedback, then suddenly it's not their thing. Then suddenly it's, oh, but all of the good points in the book were my Uncle Bob's points that he came to me after that Christmas dinner when I asked him about it. I don't feel like I've written the book. The reality is you did. You took the chance on Uncle Bob's feedback or somebody else's. You don't have to be afraid that your final product or your final event or experience or whatever it is you're doing, that it's not yours just because you listened to feedback. After all, there aren't that many original ideas anyway. So don't be afraid to listen. Last but not least, this is a kind of tip number 11 for all of you out there. Feedback isn't for everyone, and it's not for all times. In fact, it can be pretty damn annoying when you've done something and people appoint themselves quality control ambassadors for you without having asked them. It's nice to get a pat on the back. It's nice to have somebody say, yeah, you did the thing, Klaus. Yes, go you, instead of saying, there's a spelling mistake there. There's an error. You could have done this better. The lighting was bad. What were you thinking? It's sometimes nice just to get somebody saying, hey, good job. We like that you did something. So feedback, it's not for always. And sometimes you don't want it. Sometimes you never want it. And if you're one of those people that never want it, don't worry. You can always choose to be this guy. Thank you.